Do your car drawings still look wonky even after putting in hours of work? If they do, it's probably because you're making the one mistake all successful illustrators have had to overcome. In this video, you're going to see my fail-proof step-by-step process for drawing 3D cars that look amazing from any angle, quickly and efficiently. By the end of this video, you'll be able to draw a classic DeLorean, a Honda Civic, and a monster truck.
If you have trouble like drawing straight lines, try to draw with your arm instead of your wrist. It's not going to be exactly the same when you eyeball it and you construct it, because you're going to be changing some of the perspective a little bit more naturally. You just want to find out, where the corner is roughly, and then where the lights are. But look for all of the lines and all of the alignments that you see. I would say the door is probably about halfway, maybe a little less than halfway. So you can see that this line that I drew here sort of aligns the two wheels, and it kind of gives me a good point of reference for where those should be. So you can see with the door, I just kind of eyeballed it. Eyeballing can be super effective and a really good way to practice. Even if the cars are like not as boxy, say they're a bit more contoured, right? They're round, or they've got more like nice curves to them. You could always start it off with boxy shapes and then round it later. So eyeball the wheel first, and if you have trouble eyeballing it, then try to put it into a prism. So there's like different parts to the tire. There's like this front part, and then there's the part that touches the pavement. Note to self, figure out where the middle is, and then draw the rest of the wheel. The other thing you could do is you could draw the shadow. Like if you draw the shadow, you know that the wheels touch the shadow, and you can kind of like get the perspective of the shadow. I can't see the other wheel on this car, but what you can do is you can find the bottom of that wheel, like if you had to guess where it is, and then it would touch that line. So once you have the basic shapes down, then you can modify. So for example, I need to make the front of the car a little bit longer, right? So then I can kind of add on here. So work big to small. Try not to get lost in the details, because if you're just focusing on details, it can be very confusing. Like I can't tell you how many times I've gotten lost just like trying to draw a car, because I'm getting lost in the details. So then I'm like, wait a minute, which line is this? I'm confused. I'm gonna modify the wheel. Right, so you can see it's based off of something that's very square, but then I can modify it later. I'm just gonna like map out where the details are, and then I will get to rendering. I think that's what most people struggle with, is just to be able to draw a car that actually looks solid. Like the rendering is actually pretty easy when it comes to cars, because you can use the airbrush and the lasso tool and just go nuts, and it can look really good as long as it looks structurally sound. The one thing you want to remember about rims is that they are not a perfect donut. If you're looking at a wheel from the front, it's gonna look like a perfect donut somewhat. But most wheels are actually really distorted. What you need to do is figure out, okay, where's the middle of that wheel? Okay, this is the middle. And then where's the middle of this part? It's right here. And then you kind of have to draw out the wheel as if it's a 3D form within this shape in space. So you kind of have to think about it like that. And that's what makes it really hard, because also tires are not flat, right? So if you think about a tire from the side, let's say you think about a tire like this, the tire itself is actually round, right? Like the top of the tire and the bottom of the tire are rounded. So it makes it even harder to draw that tire. So for me personally, it's easier to just eyeball it for the most part, because drawing a wheel in a box in perspective is just as hard. So you can see, for example, with this rim, right, it's actually indented, and it doesn't appear indented in the front one. It just appears indented in the back wheel. And so the nuances in the differences of the wheel from the front and the back is also really subtle. I actually like this kind of loose look. If you're only doing line art, then it would help to, for example, make a few accent lines, right? Some accent lines that are a little bit darker, or anything that's like more mechanical or important to the structure, you can emphasize a little bit more. And then as you build up the line, you'll get more and more confident with where they go, right? Because if you figure it out before you render, then everything else is easy. And with these rims, you'll notice that some of them appear larger and some of them appear smaller. So instead of drawing all of them, I just kind of draw some of them and then suggest the rest. Oh, look at these leather seats. They have wrinkles on them. And these are those little details that you can add. Let's say that you're drawing different textures, right? The car is going to look more boxy and more structural if you put a little bit of looseness into the fabric. And you can see that just putting a little bit of like wrinkles in the seat enhances the mechanical part of the car. So there are some corners that you can emphasize too. So for example, like these lights, right? If you wanted to put some texture in them. So I would always put details in the parts that are the closest to me. Contrast is a principle of design. And so the more contrast you have is better for aesthetics. And you can have contrast in different areas. You could have like contrast in value, contrast in texture, contrast in color. With the Civic, especially with a hatchback, right? This is kind of a curvy car. It's not as much of a boxy car. So there's one way to think about it. So this is kind of like a rudimentary way of sketching out a vehicle from its profile shape. It works for some people, but I don't really like to draw it that way. I still like to draw it as a box. So I usually draw the bottom and the top separately. If you do it this way, it tends to look like a toy car. It's fine if this is the best way to wrap your head around cars. I don't know if you guys experience this, but when I was a little kid, I just remember always seeing faces in cars, and there were like good cars and bad cars. And I always thought like BMWs looked kind of angry because they kind of have an upturned nose and Then I learned that cars are actually designed to look like faces. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm not actually crazy. I tend to use like darker lines when I'm like, okay, I'm sure that this is where this line goes.
Oh, if you'd like the full-length workshop for this tutorial so you can draw with me step by step in real time, you can get it for free in the description.
Sometimes you're like really into a drawing, right? It's like, oh, it's going really well, but then you realize when you step back from it that it is totally disproportionate. That's what happens when you focus too much on the details. To get really good at eyeballing, you have to be really good at two things. One, working big to small, and two, looking at your reference more often than you think you should. I see a lot of people use reference, but they don't even look at it. They just like have it up, glance at it back and forth, especially if it's something that you don't really draw often. Like if you can't see that much detail in the reference, then you really don't need to put a lot of detail in your drawing. I always like looking at reflections in vehicles, like, you know, reflections of stuff in the vehicles. Again, it's another kind of organic versus industrial contrast, which I like the aesthetic of. And when you're shading cars, the best way to shade them is to hatch them. So not necessarily cross hatching, but hatching one way. You notice like I shaded this part of the window going vertically and this part going horizontally because this window is closed and this window is open. So if I want one window to be open, and then I have to kind of draw it in a slightly different way. When you're trying to capture likeness, whether it's in a car or whether it's in a person, you always want to find like the most familiar feature of that car, right? Or of that person. So in this case, it's the car. And I find that this bumper here, especially like this part of the bumper that I'm drawing right now, is really like I would remember it as a key feature. So in that case, I think it's worth giving it the added detail. All right, let's do a jump in monster truck. how would I approach this monster truck? So first of all, it's jumping in the air. The perspective is crazy. I would actually draw the axis of the wheels because that's pretty much the gesture. The wheels, you can kind of draw a diamond shape that represents the axis where the wheels attach. Like, just figure out the placement first. If you were drawing a car for the first time and you've never drawn a car before, most likely you would outline stuff. And usually it doesn't turn out so well. When you know the fundamentals, you're just kind of like, okay, I know where to start. Because I've learned that it's easier, like when you draw cars, it's a lot easier to draw basic forms and construct them than it is to outline. Constructing out of forms is way better than outlining for anything, not just cars, for drawing people. So the more fundamentals you know, the less you really have to think about what it is, like the method and like all of those things. It just you start to get more clarity, and then you can focus on things like storytelling. So the fundamentals is like things like figuring out where the middle line is when you're drawing things in perspective. Some of it is math, unfortunately. You thought you could be an artist and not do math. Well, surprise. Don't worry, it's like visual math, so it's not as bad. When I'm drawing something like this, like a monster truck, I think about what is the biggest thing, because you want to work big to small, right? The biggest thing are the wheels, and the wheels, I have to kind of make sense of it. So, you know, you can either draw the wheels, like you can align them like this and kind of draw them as one cylinder, or you can draw them separately, which I kind of started. And now I'm like looking at the distance between the wheels and realizing that they need to be a lot thicker than they actually are. So I'm going to make that adjustment. To figure out the tread, you need to figure out where the middle is, right? And it's kind of hard to figure out the middle on a subject that is not exactly centered. And like how the treads kind of change direction as it moves into space. I tell this to my students a lot. You have to trick your brain. Your brain is going to sabotage your efforts as an artist. Your brain's going to be like, you know, Faye, you can't draw this. It's too hard. It's like you're never gonna get this. The perspective is so weird. Like, why did you choose this picture anyway? It's like, why did you do this to yourself, right? So your brain's always gonna kind of talk at you and insult you and tell you can't do it, and whatever you're drawing is too hard. But you have to trick your brain. You gotta be like, brain, I am not drawing a monster truck. Okay, I am drawing a flat photo of some cylinders that just happen to be aligned, and they happen to look like tires, but they're just cylinders with some marks on them. And on top of the cylinder is this cube or this prism with another prism on top, and you know, a bunch of lines. Like it's no problem. I got this. And the more abstract you can tell your brain, or you can like try to look at stuff as if it's abstract forms, then the easier it becomes. The worst thing to do is to see it as it is. Like, for example, if you take something that's like really hard to draw and you look at it literally, then your brain's going to be like, I can't do this, it's too complicated. Even if you look at the underside of the car, it's really complicated, right? I am not going to draw all that stuff in there. I'm just going to suggest it. My brain's like, what is that even? Like, how are you even going to draw those wires? You don't know how a monster truck works. And I'm going to be like, you know what? Nobody's going to question the mechanics of this. There's no monster truck engineers looking at my drawing, criticizing it. Okay, like, people are going to see it. And they're going to be like, yeah, that's a monster truck. Like, the wheels are bigger than the truck. It's a monster truck. So most people do not spend hours looking at your drawing. They look at it and they either get it or they don't get it. Maybe they're a little bit confused. But we, as artists, we tend to overthink stuff, like dramatically, and it really doesn't help us at all. So again, like all these patterns on the monster truck, like ultimately it doesn't really matter. Like there are some parts that are just like dark, right? You just kind of sketch out a shape, and then there's some stuff, railing-like things underneath. As long as it kind of looks convincing, then nobody's going to question it.
Join a virtual art class in seconds and learn live from Wing Campus instructors. Enjoy weekly assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork so you can create like a fearless illustrator. If you learned something new, please like and share this with a fellow art nerd. If you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. Here's a couple other videos you can check out next.